Okay, hello everyone. Welcome everyone to this Institution of Environmental Sciences webinar, the Ocean Climate Nexus, Supporting Climate Ambitions Through a Sustainable Blue Economy. I'm delighted to be joined by expert speakers who will be exploring the topic of the blue economy and its role in meeting climate ambitions. This webinar is part of our fifth theme in our stages on the road to COP26, economy. So after their presentations, you'll have the chance to ask our speakers questions. Please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen at any point during the presentation, and then these will be read out on behalf by our chair. Thank you for logging in. I'm now going to introduce our chair for today. So Catherine Collins is a principal consultant at Howe Marine Consulting, where she works on a variety of projects within marine research, policy, and blue economy. Catherine has built her career through exploring how multiple values and meanings can be incorporated into marine governance. Throughout her career, Catherine has been interested in how qualitative data can be used as evidence within policy development and marine consenting processes. This is particularly important when considering the transition to blue economic frameworks to ensure that these transitions are just and benefit all marine users and stakeholders. She is also a member of the IES COP26 community. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll now hand over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks Ethne for that introduction. I'm delighted to be here today chairing this session. We have some fantastic speakers today. I'm just going to give a very short introduction before introducing our speakers and then handing over to them for the real kind of substantive part of this webinar. So the oceans and seas play an integral role in stabilising our climate and provide additional ecosystem services that we all depend on. The worldwide ocean economy is valued at around $1.5 trillion per year, which I can't even imagine how big that is. Blue economy is an emerging concept used to refer to ocean resources and economic activities. And that's the subject of today's discussion, really kind of getting into the details of what this definition means. It also encompasses the ethos of the need to use our oceans sustainably, and also have a stewardship role for the marine environment. So today we have two speakers, and it's with regret that our third speaker and my colleague, Dr. Lucy Greenhill, had to send her apologies today, but I'm sure our remaining speakers will fill that space. So we have Dr. Dennis Fritsch and Professor Ed Hill. I'll give a brief introduction to both of them now before handing over to them to really get into the details of blue economy. So Dennis leads the United Nations Sustainable Blue Economy Framework Initiative and focuses on bringing banks, insurers, and investors together to develop guidance and tools to enable financial institutions to align their activities with a sustainable ocean economy. He is also working as a consultant and expert jury member for the European Commission's Blue Invest Fund and Blue Marine Foundation. And Dennis will be presenting on what the blue economy is and how it relates to COP26, very much looking at finance within this. Following Dennis, Ed will provide our second talk today. He's the Chief Executive of the National Oceanographic Centre, one of the world's most innovative oceanographic institutions. And you can tell I'm not an oceanographer, I'm a planner. These big words are lost on me. He has a research background in physical oceanography, specializing in the circulation of continental shelf seas, and has participated in over 20 research expeditions. Ed has served and continues to serve on numerous national and international advisory bodies. And today, Ed will be talking to us about the role of the Ocean Decade in scaling up for a blue economy, really focusing on the need for a knowledge economy within that. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Dennis for our first presentation.
Thanks very much, Catherine. And it's great to be here. Let me first of all share my screen, and I hope that will work out. So yeah, thanks for inviting me to speak. My name is Dennis Fritsch, and as Catherine said, I lead the Sustainable Economy Finance Initiative at UNEP-FI. For those who don't know us, we're a partnership between the UN Environment Programme and the private financial sector. So we work with more than 400 banks, insurers, and institutional investors to develop the global sustainable finance agenda. And specifically on this topic, we convene a community of practice on the sustainable blue finance, focused on providing guidance and tools to ensure that investment, underwriting, and lending activities are aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goal 14, life below water. So in short, our vision really is to mainstream sustainable finance practices supporting ocean health across the global financial industry. And you may ask why governments and financial institutions should care about ocean health at all, and I will try to answer these questions today. So to start off with, and most of you will probably know some of these figures or most of these figures better than I do, the ocean covers over 70% of our planet and is home to 80% of all life, making it the largest ecosystem on Earth. But not only that, the ocean also regulates the global climate. It acts as the largest natural carbon sink, and it produces around half the oxygen we breathe. In economic terms, seafood and other marine organisms provide the primary source of protein for almost 3 billion people, and coral reefs and mangrove forests act as natural barriers protecting coastal communities from storms and floods. And all these goods, services, and economic activities that happen in the ocean, that we derive from the ocean, are estimated to be equivalent to the world's 7th largest economy in GDP terms. Some estimates even set the annual value of ocean assets at $2.5 trillion, and Catherine, we have to check sources later on which number is more accurate. But there's definitely a lot of value in ocean assets. And what is clear is that major global industries either depend on or impact the ocean's health. And such sectors we term ocean linked, because their global economic output is reliant on a healthy ocean. And this next slide really gives you a quite rough overview of sectors which are taking place in the marine environment or which have an impact on it, or both. And financial institutions will be involved in some, if not all of them. Some of these sectors, as you can see, have clear links to the ocean and represent major global industries. Like, as an example, up to 90% of global trade is done via shipping. Of course, the global fisheries sector is also massive. And some other sectors here on the screen have more indirect links to the ocean, like, for example, upstream agriculture or industry, which is connected to coastal marine ecosystems via rivers and streams. And I think this is not necessarily the blue economy as we see it in a sustainability sense, but this is really just to show that the global economy is touching on the ocean at various different points, and ocean health is really fundamental for almost all economic activities and sectors. The second UN World Ocean Assessment shows that the ocean really is in a dire state, and most of you will know this already. There's a lot of doom and gloom around this topic. Unfortunately, human activities have already severely altered around 2/3 of the marine environment, leading to a triple crisis, as we say at the UN, concerning the climate, biodiversity, and nature loss, as well as pollution and waste. And in addition to being serious threats to nature and societies, of course, these crises also lead to economic losses, which are often not considered. And these three themes are really highly interconnected in the case of the ocean. And just to give you a couple of examples, as I mentioned earlier, in the context of the climate crisis, the ocean is the largest natural carbon sink. It's estimated to have taken up almost 1/3 of total anthropogenic CO2 emissions since the 1980s. This has, however, come at a cost, with the uptake of CO2 alongside it taking up more than 90% of the excess heat in the atmosphere, resulting in rapid acidification and warming of the global ocean. And this has a whole host of negative effects, with the most well-known and probably most well-discussed being coral bleaching and projected significant losses of warm water coral reefs globally, even if warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And again, I want to link that back to economic terms, because this is really the work that we are mostly involved with. The IPCC actually estimates that climate-induced declines in ocean health will cost the global economy $428 billion per year by mid-century, and almost $2 trillion annually by the end of the century. And these numbers are mind-boggling, even for someone who regularly works with the financial sector. And these are related to climate change impacts alone, so not taking into account the negative impacts of pollution, for example. Concerning pollution, plastics has been on everyone's mind, of course. However, there are, of course, other sources of pollution negatively impacting ocean health and local economies. A prominent example is chemicals discharged into rivers and coastal areas coming from factories or farms inland. And here, excess nutrients and chemicals cause so-called dead zones along the coast, where the oxygen content in the water drops drastically, resulting in large-scale death of marine life. And a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico was estimated to create annual losses to the local seafood and tourism industries of 82 million US dollars. So that's not neglectable. Lastly, when looking at biodiversity and habitat loss, extractive marine industries add further pressure. One prominent example here is the industrial fisheries sector. Over half of the ocean is targeted by industrial fishing, and for comparison, that's a larger footprint than agriculture has on land, which I find a fact that's especially striking. With almost 90% of fish stocks either fully exploited or overexploited, the long-term viability of the entire industry is currently at risk, which of course also concerns financial institutions. And of course, financial institutions provide the financing, investment, and insurance required to power ocean-linked sectors. And there is a growing recognition that through their financial activities, they have an enormous impact on ocean health. That's especially true in light of recent attention on the issues of overfishing, plastic pollution, and oil spills. What really becomes clear is that mismanaged marine industries and economic activities with a negative impact on the ocean are receiving ever more coverage, and they certainly climb up the agenda of governments and society as a whole. And this, at the very least, represents a significant reputational risk for financial institutions and businesses that are involved in such activities. And it's really becoming clear, slowly but surely, that business as usual is no longer an option. And so there really is a need for change in our approach to ocean assets, for a transition towards a sustainable way of managing ocean resources. And this is where the concept of the blue economy comes in, and the leverage financial institutions have take center stage. So the transition to a sustainable blue economy is really an opportunity to recast how we use and manage ocean resources at a time when there are multiple crises facing its health. In essence, the sustainable blue economy acts as a vision for any ocean-linked sector, highlighting that sustainability cannot be separate from economic activities and growth, but is a condition for both of these things. So within the blue economy, there are traditional maritime industries which are not very sustainable in their current state, and which certainly need financing to transition and at pace. There are others which are already on the right track. However, they require support to scale sustainable business models. So I want to highlight here that from our point of view, this is not only an environmental and social challenge, it's also an economic opportunity. There is a real business case here. And by building sustainable blue finance practices into decision-making processes and by engaging with clients on these issues, financial institutions really have a unique opportunity to steer ocean industries towards sustainability. And I've mentioned some examples for this earlier, like the seafood sector. So if this sector does not change its ways, it will continue to damage the very assets on which it depends. Here's where a sustainable approach could really provide an economic opportunity. The World Bank estimates that sustainably managed fisheries could result in an additional 83 billion US dollars a year for the seafood sector. So it's really worth it doing some work in this sector to change things around. Crucially, also for today's topic, when it comes to fighting the climate crisis, the ocean can be an important ally. Some sectors such as offshore wind energy provide solutions to transition away from fossil fuels. Other approaches like looking at natural capital and nature-based solutions also provide opportunities. As an example, mangrove forests have multiple co-benefits, ranging from efficient protection of coastal areas from sea level rise, storm surges, and erosion, over being highly efficient at sequestering CO2, to also providing crucial nursery habitat for many fish species. Globally, mangroves protect 15 million people from flooding and reduce flood damages, crucially for the insurance sector, by 65 billion US dollars a year. And such nature-based solutions are relevant in the context of lowering risk exposure, as well as increasing resilience in times of unprecedented weather events and variability. And in the lead up to COP26 in Glasgow in a couple of weeks, more and more countries as well as businesses, are realizing that healthy coastal ecosystems are key to achieving their national determined contributions, or NDCs, and climate goals. And just to go back to the financial sector, which I really want to highlight, is also taking note of these developments. We recently did a survey of over 100 financial institutions where it really became clear that there's a broad and surging interest in the sustainable blue economy in aligning capital flows with ocean health. So there is a growing recognition among finance professionals who are providing capital to power these industries that collectively they have an enormous impact on ocean health, and that building resilience and long-term stability into marine industries for them means that financial players reduce risks of default and claims, ensuring their financial activities provide long-term viability and profitability. However, as you can see here on the screen, although there's a lot of interest in this topic, there's not necessarily a lot of expertise. And this is where global and science-based criteria for financing a transformation of ocean-linked sectors to a sustainable blue economy are crucial in giving a clear direction to governments, but also financial institutions on what is really required in terms of action. And at UNIP, for these reasons, we are building a global community of banks, insurers, and investors to bring forward the development of such a sustainable blue economy. So specifically, that means we work with experts in the field and practitioners on educating the industry about the blue economy and why ocean health is crucial to financial institutions. With over 60 pioneer institutions already on board, we of course always invite interested parties to join the global community of practice and take a leadership role in shaping the future of financing the ocean. But crucially, we support the implementation of the sustainable blue economy finance principles, which aim to direct the flow of capital towards activities which directly contribute to SDG 14, Life Below Water. They're the world's first global guiding framework to finance a sustainable blue economy, and crucially are aligned with existing frameworks and global targets such as the Paris Agreement, putting them into practice in an ocean context. Just a bit more about our work before I wrap up. Really building on the momentum of these principles, we've been working with our members and external experts on producing usable industry resources and tools, such as our recently published practical blue finance guidance called Turning the Tide, which covers 5 sectors of the blue economy, including seafood, shipping, ports, marine renewable energy, and coastal tourism. And this is really meant to be a practical toolkit, outlining recommendations for banks, insurers, and investors of how a transition towards a sustainable blue economy can look like in practice. So it crucially makes the link between the climate, environmental, and social impacts of these sectors and business considerations for banks, insurers, and investors. Why should they care about these impacts from a risk perspective is really the question that we want to answer here. And it's meant to help decision makers at these institutions how to learn how to avoid and mitigate these risks and impacts, as well as how to make the most of opportunities in this space by highlighting which activities across these sectors they should seek out as best practice. And in addition, we've also just published a recommended exclusions list, which provides an overview of activities to exclude from financing due to their damaging impact on the ocean and high business risk. So this really was developed to offer an easy to use and a glance overview of the activities to exclude from financing. Really the worst of the worst activities, things like bottom trawling or supporting illegal activities. This is now being used by our members to implement in their day-to-day work. If you're interested to have a look at these resources, feel free to visit our website. Both of these are available for free and completely open access. We'll be happy to hear of any feedback as well, of course. And with that, I would like to wrap up. I would like to give you a very brief outlook of the work that we're doing currently. So we're currently actually field testing the Turning the Tide guidance recommendations with our members, with a view of informing our work on guidance version 2 and how these recommendations fare in practice, what is possible to implement, where there might be roadblocks from the financial institution side. We're also working on version 2 of these guidelines, expanding the sectoral scope towards waste management, including plastics, and coastal infrastructure and resilience, including nature-based solutions, So, and that work has just started, and of course is highly relevant in the lead up to COP as well. We've also been supporting the European Commission in their work to establish a taxonomy in sustainable finance, specifically looking at criteria for activities which relate to marine ecosystems. And I do want to finish by saying that it's true, bad news about the ocean's health and abound out there, but it does not have to be this way. And that's why I really want to highlight that financial institutions can act as an enabler of change by using their expertise in finding opportunities and understanding of risk. We have a symbiotic relationship with the ocean to solve the climate, biodiversity, and pollution crises. A healthy and prosperous ocean is our main ally. And therefore, I encourage anyone in the audience today to start evaluating their organization's impact on the marine environment to show leadership on this topic of the sustainable blue economy. The science is clear, so let's act on it. Thanks very much, and I look forward to hearing questions later.
Thank you very much, Dennis. That was fascinating. I must admit that finance isn't an area that I get involved in as much as I should, but I think just being able to speak kind of the right language to the right people is really key, and hopefully we can draw that out a bit more in questions. But right now, I'm going to turn over to Ed for his talk.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Catherine, and I think I have some slides coming up shortly. So firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'm going to talk about the blue economy, say a little bit about what it is, and connect it with the climate issue, and then talk a little bit about the decade of ocean science and how it links to the development of the blue economy. So we'll just move on to the next slide. There has been a lot of thinking about the ocean economy, going back in these various reports over many years, really, to for about a decade. You'll see various terms being used here: the ocean economy, the blue economy, and I'm going to say a little bit more about what the differences are. But there's been a huge amount of thinking about the role of the ocean, whether that be through the UNEP program, through the OECD's very influential report on the ocean economy in 2030, which is the report which provided the key figure that the direct economic gross value added of ocean-based industries would rise from 1.5 to $3 trillion a year from 2015 to 2030. The World Bank produced a very influential report, including an important definition of the blue economy in 2017. The high-level panel on the ocean economy, which was convened by the Norwegian Prime Minister and involves 14 and indeed now a growing number of heads of state and heads of government, focused on the way in which the development of the ocean economy can provide a number of solutions, has again produced a number of influential reports. The European Union has launched its blue economy strategy, and there's been other thinking too. So just moving to the next slide, I just wanted to put the ocean economic activities in the context of climate, and I'm doing this through the medium of the ocean carbon cycle, which is really at the heart of what is going on with climate change. We talk of climate change in relation to global warming, and that is the symptom of it. But really, what is happening is that human beings have interrupted and altered the Earth's carbon cycle. And so you can see that what is being manifest is the accumulation of carbon in the atmosphere, around about just over 6 billion tons of carbon every year. But underneath that is sitting a whole series of complex interplays between different parts of the Earth system. The lands, biota, and soils, the fossil fuels, subsoils, which are actually being burnt, coastal ecosystems and sediments, and then what is happening out in the open ocean and deep sea. And what I've done is highlighted here a number of points where marine activities, marine economic activities in particular, play into this carbon cycle. So over at on the left-hand side, the greenhouse gas problem is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, and a number of marine interventions are able to intervene directly into this issue. So the substitution of energy generation with marine renewables, and in future probably hydrogen generation from the sea is an important part of actually reducing the CO2 at source. Marine activities and marine industries themselves are also important emitters of fossil fuels, not least of which is the shipping industry. Presently, it's about 2.3% of global emissions is from shipping. But as other sectors of the marine economy decarbonize, shipping is one of the most difficult sectors to decarbonize. And that percentage is estimated it could grow to 17, 18% of global emissions coming from shipping as other sectors decarbonize. So decarbonizing some of the offshore activities is an important part of that as well. Then we move into the coastal areas, and Dennis talked about mangroves and sorts of seagrasses and coral systems and other areas. The role of the coastal and shelf seas and their sediments in the carbon cycle is highly uncertain. We believe it to be a net sink, but in some areas that is open to question as to whether the coastal seas are actually a net sink or source of carbon, or are they merely a conduit by which there is a net flux from the land into the deep ocean with no net benefit at all. But nevertheless, there are opportunities in the coast areas through enhancing some of the coastal carbon sinks, like coastal biota or coastal biota, which deposit that carbon into the sediments. Seagrasses, mangroves, and salt marshes being very important examples of that. There are also opportunities in the coastal regions where, in fact, much of the food production occurs, whether that be wild catch fisheries or aquaculture, to perhaps use food production at sea as a lower carbon footprint, if done properly, alternative to growing food on land, which can be very energy and water intensive with resulting CO2 emissions. Then we move into the open ocean, and there are a whole range of issues here, from item 3, where the industry developing of putting the carbon dioxide back where it came from into subsea oil and gas reservoirs as an emerging industry for dealing with that, through to a much more contentious question is that many of the green technologies, including for renewable energy and indeed the digital revolution, which is associated with greening, depend on strategic minerals, which are either in short supply or insecure on land. And increasingly, the deep sea is being looked at as a potential source of some of the strategic minerals required for things like batteries for electric cars and for other for photovoltaic cells and so forth. So there's a whole issue there about the ocean as a source of minerals to actually which are critically important for some of the green technologies. And then at the sort of more distant end of the spectrum, may it become necessary to actually try to intervene into the ocean carbon cycle itself through geoengineering interventions, which might try to encourage an increased rate of sequestration of carbon into the deep seas inorganic carbon sink, which you can see is absolutely massive. It's the largest mobile store of inorganic carbon on the planet, and getting it there where it's locked up for many thousands of years, or into the deep sea sediments where it's locked up for even longer, as are potential solutions. So those are some of the ways in which ocean activities can offer solutions directly into this carbon cycle. So moving on to the next slide, the high-level panel on the ocean economy has presented this diagram, which really illustrates some of what I was just saying, that actually some of these ocean activities do offer important benefits and solutions in terms of reducing net emissions. Decarbonizing the shipping fleet, using aquaculture, both nearshore and indeed offshore, as an alternative to energy-intensive land-based agriculture, and so forth, all contributing to emissions reductions. And you can see in the table on the right that the contributions that each of these solutions or interventions could provide, with an estimate, bottom line really, that in order to achieve a 1.5 degree centigrade warming target by 2050, the need to take 56 billion tons of CO2 emissions out of the system. And in aggregate, those solutions, at the optimistic end of the spectrum, and there are error bars on all of these, could provide up to 21% of those emissions reductions or contribution to it. So a very significant set of solutions available in the marine economy. So moving to the next slide. I just wanted to explore some of the terms that are being used, and I've talked almost interchangeably about the ocean economy and the blue economy. What I am going to do is try to tease that out, but I'm going to show a diagram shortly, in which I'll try and do this illustratively. But the economy is defined as the process of and system by which goods and services are produced, or the system of trade and industry by which the wealth of a country is created. And we usually measure that through gross domestic product, gross value added, and so forth. The issue with that economy, as we can see, is unquantified is a lot of the natural capital and the natural ecosystem services which enable that economy to function. So the normal everyday economy in many ways is reliant, or indeed assumes, that nature is a free good, and is actually resulting in degradation of the natural capital of the Earth system in order to generate that economic benefit. Whereas the green economy, which is essentially a low carbon, resource efficient and socially inclusive economy as defined by UNEP, is really introducing the concept of decoupling economic growth from the need to degrade both the natural capital of the Earth system and indeed sustaining the ecosystem services upon which it relies, as well as being not only environmentally sustainable, as I've just described, but also socially sustainable. The ocean economy was described by the OECD as accompanying all of the ocean-based industries that are operating in the marine environment. But the term blue economy and the concept of blue economy has no single definition. But nevertheless, there is an emerging picture that the blue economy is more constrained or defined than the ocean economy, and adds into it a number of constraints. And it really is about the range of economic sectors and related policies that together determine whether the use of oceanic resources is sustainable. And so talking about the improvement of economic activity, improving human well-being, social equity, while significantly reducing the environmental risks and ecological scarcities. So decoupling this socio-economic activity from environmental degradation. So the blue economy is really, if you like, the sustainable ocean economy. So moving to the next slide. I'll just try to tease this out a little bit more with this diagram, which shows, if you like, our conventional economy as we understand it in black, which grows through GDP growth into the sort of the dotted black line. But as you can see with the red arrow pointing vertically, this has been happening at the cost of depleting both our natural capital as well as degrading the ecosystem services. The green economy, on the other hand, is about both growing the economy, but without that degradation of the natural capital and being socially sustainable as well. The ocean economy, you can see, is a subset of the total economy, which includes the marine environment, some of which is green and some of which is not. And the bit that is compatible with the green economy is what we define as the blue economy. And the growth in the blue economy can happen in two ways. Firstly, without growing the entire economy itself. In other words, there is a greater share of the total economy is coming from blue economic activities, or the blue economy actually contributes to the growth of the wider economy, blue growth. But it does that in a way which does not degrade the ocean's natural capital. So that is one way of putting the blue economy in context, although there is, as I say, no single definition of the economy. But moving on from that, I will now have a look then at the ocean economy itself. The wider ocean economy is really an economy which is defined by its environment. It is defined by the ocean environment. And secondly, as this diagram shows, is fundamentally a knowledge-based economy. It depends on the interaction of three things: the ocean-based industries that are using and undertaking activities within the marine environment, the system, the environment itself, the ocean environment, underpinned by its natural capital and ecosystem services, and the system of governance, of policy and regulation, and indeed financial governance, as was referred to before, that frames the way in which that operates. But knowledge is absolutely essential to functioning in the ocean economy. The ocean economy always has been a knowledge-based economy. The know-how, whether that be traditional knowledge or scientific knowledge, has been absolutely crucial to operating in the very challenging and harsh environment of the marine system. And so it always has been and will continue to be and will need to develop as a knowledge-based economy. One of the things that is said in the World Bank made this remark is that the private sector, with the ocean-based industries, can and must play a key role in the blue economy. I find that statement slightly surprising because it implies, in my view, downplays their importance. In fact, there is no blue economy at all without the ocean-based industries. They are the engine of innovation and the wealth creation sector of this economy. And so we really do need to understand those ocean-based industries and the constraints within which they operate to understand how the ocean economy will move. So moving to the next slide.
Hi, sorry, Ed, just to interrupt. Your sound went a bit funny then. I'm not sure if you've got something on the microphone, over the microphone. We can hear you, but just maybe if you lean back a little bit, it might be a bit better.
Yes, I haven't noticed anything different. Is it better now?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Thank you very much.
Okay, fine, thank you. Okay, so moving to the next slide. So just a recent report has talked about the blue economy based around 5 principles called RAISE, and it's about raising the ambition of the blue economy. But RAISE is the first letter of each of the words here. It's a regenerative, it involves conserving and restoring the vitality of the ocean environment. It's adaptive, in other words, it's adaptive to a changing climate, but also changing knowledge and ways of working. It's inclusive, socially inclusive of all stakeholders, and especially those who depend on the sea, sustainable in the way that I've describing in terms of not degrading natural capital, but also socially, but also crucially evidence-led. It's based on really a knowledge-based data for how to operate safely and securely and sustainably in the ocean environment. So that evidence-led is one of the key principles underpinning the ocean economy. So moving to the next slide. Here's the triangle of the ocean industries, the governance, and the environment. And outside the outer circle of blue are the things that are really about the principles of sustainability in the blue economy that I've talked about: social equity, using precautionary principles, much more holistic approaches across sectors, going beyond business as usual, and so forth. Inside this is the orange ring, which is, if you look at the ocean economy today, it experiences a number of challenges. The ocean industries today, working in the marine environment, wherever you are, is a very costly business. It has a very expensive cost structure, very high capital investments in the infrastructures needed to work in the marine environment. It means that the return on investment tends to be long, very highly capital intense. The profit margins tend to be lower. It's also an industry which has got a number of challenges, very, very long timescales of planning required. You know, a ship has got a 30-year life cycle. You know, it's not something that can move very quickly. The sector tends to be very fragmented across multiple industries, but also multiple interesting groups in government, as is actually some of the regulatory environment. Safety is an absolutely crucial issue, which adds cost, but really puts a number of very important constraints on the way in which marine industries can operate. And so it's really important to understand these very real constraints that operate in the marine environment in order to today, even those industries that are working less sustainably, to understand the base from which one is having to move out into this much greater ambition around the blue economy. So therefore, moving to the next slide, you can see that the ocean economy and the blue economy consists of a range of industries, both those that are established, traditional industries like fishing and shipping and ports and coastal tourism. But you can see growing sectors, you know, offshore wind, offshore aquaculture, growing in terms of the business cycle. And then there are industries in decline. For example, will be in decline, the traditional oil and gas sector. And the real challenge for them will be how to reinvent what they do now and to transition into the blue economy in terms of moving into you know, switching some of the skills and infrastructures into supporting in new forms of energy generation, the green transition in the shipping industry, for example. And then we have emerging sectors, you know, relating to you know, renewable energy generation, but the whole ocean economy is going to be fueled by data and information. So the whole question of surveillance, management, providing ocean information to generate the information needed to fuel this knowledge-based economy as a whole emerging sector in its own right. And in each of these areas, the red dot shows innovation is needed. And this is where science and technology comes in helping established industries transition and supporting the growth of existing and indeed emerging industries. So moving to the next slide, it brings me very directly to the question then of the role of science and technology in underpinning this growing sustainable blue economy. The decade of ocean science for sustainable development, which has been declared by the UN and will run from 2021 to 2030, it has started and was featured in a recent issue of Environmental Scientist, is really about taking this issue on very directly in terms of generating the science we need for the ocean we want. The ocean we want being clean, healthy, safe, productive, one which is predicted, where the data and the need to operate in it is accessible, and is an ocean which continues to inspire and engage people in it. The ocean has got very much an out of sight, out of mind attitude associated with it. That was illustrated well earlier. And it's really important to engage everyone in the opportunities of the ocean, and indeed to raise the number of people who really understand the concept of the blue economy and what it can do. And science and technology has got a key role to play in both informing the understanding of the ocean, to see what we can achieve in the ocean, to inspire and to inform actions. But as the diagram at the bottom right from the Global Ocean Science Report shows, in terms of, this is just one metric of scientific publication outputs, there are huge imbalances across the world in access to ocean information and participating in the science and technology needed to drive innovation. And there therefore needs to be a huge rebalancing and re-engagement and engagement of people across the world in order that the development of the blue economy can be equitable. And as the knowledge economy is so essential to it, you can see that these great imbalances in the sharing of ocean knowledge and access to it really needs to be addressed. And this is one of the key features of the ocean decade. So therefore, moving to almost the last slide, the ocean decade sets out a number of challenges. I won't repeat them here, except that they're in three main categories. Developing the notion, the knowledge and solution to address some of the key challenges, new knowledge we need to solve some of the problems that I've identified and to stimulate innovation in these new areas. And there are 5 challenges particularly around those. But there are also been identified a series of key pieces of what's called infrastructure challenges in order to have a basic information gathering and using system that can provide the common good knowledge for all operating in the blue environment and to fuel the blue economy. The multi-hazard warning system to protect the increasing number of people living in low-lying coastal areas and the economic infrastructure and activity there. To develop a much more sustainable ocean sensing system so that data is accessible for all, and to create a comprehensive digital representation of the ocean which is widely accessible. And then a number of really key foundational challenges around access to data, the inclusiveness of people who are able to engage in ocean science, developing the capacity and capability, and engaging the users of ocean information in the design of research programs and of new knowledge gathering, rather than it being something that happens at the end. In other words, to accelerate the transformation of knowledge creation into knowledge use and application very, very quickly, which must happen at a much faster rate. So therefore, moving on to what I think is the last slide. In conclusion, the development of the ocean economy, as the high-level panel has suggested, needs a series of simultaneous transformations across a whole range of things, from ocean wealth, health, ocean finance, which we've heard about, and ocean equity in terms of social inclusiveness. But one of those key transformations that also has to happen is in terms of our knowledge and access to data of the ocean. And the UN Decade of Sustainable Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is intended to galvanize international efforts to really rethink how we redouble our efforts to both increase our knowledge of how the ocean is working and to make that knowledge much more accessible, much more quickly, and much more inclusively in order to inform all of those other areas of transformation that are essential. So I will conclude it there. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Ed. That was absolutely fascinating. I mean, I have a lot of direct questions for both of our panelists, but before I do, I'm just another request. If anybody has any questions from the audience, please pop them in the Q&A or in chat, and we can fire those to our panel. I guess while we're waiting for those to go on, it's interesting, Ed, your last slide there talks about transformations, and throughout your talk, and in fact in Dennis's as well, we've been talking about transitions as well, and it feels like there's a difference between those. And Ed, you rightly kind of pointed out that there's a lot of different language used, lots of definitions for economy, blue economy, green economy, ocean economy. And I'm wondering about your thoughts on the different use of the term transition and transformation and why that's important.
Yes, you're right that those are terms which are used very, very differently. Yeah. I think there are two aspects of it. I think the transition is probably recognizing the need to be able to change and to adapt. And I think about the transformation is very much underlying one of the key principles of the blue economy, that it must be beyond business as usual. So yeah, very much what is required to go way over and above what we're doing now. And that is truly transformative in all ways. So I think that's for me the essence of that.
Fab, that's great. Dennis, do you have anything to add to that?
Not much, to be honest. I think Ed captured it quite well. I think really want to highlight this again, the transformational aspect of the changes that are needed. I think that really is what that expression really highlights, that, as Ed said, we have to go way beyond business as usual. Business as usual is not attainable anymore. And therefore a transformation of a lot of these sectors is needed. I mean, thinking about oil and gas, right? That's not just a transition. I think that's a real transformation. Like if these companies will want to be around in the future providing services, then they will have to transform towards renewable energy providers rather than transitioning, I think.
If I might comment, one of the other aspects of the transformation is we really are, and I think my last slide sort of touched on it, drawing on the high-level panel, is that we're not talking about even transformations that can be confined to an individual industry. We are very much talking about whole system transitions in which lots of things simultaneously have to change at the same time, which is one of the things that does take it specifically beyond business as usual. So just to give one example, is the shipping industry. How do we move to green shipping, move away from fossil fuel burning? And now that is one of the most horrendous challenges imaginable, and it's going to be one of the most difficult transitions. The International Maritime Organization has set a target of 50% decarbonised by 2050. That's a lot slower than the UK's ambition of net zero by 2050. Recognizing some of the long time scales involved in some of the big technological challenges. On the other hand, the issue is definitely a whole system transition, because the easy bit of it is ships. We now probably how to build ships that will run on green fuels like hydrogen or green biofuels or ammonia. But the whole shore side infrastructures, the generation of those green fuels, the transportation of them, the distribution of them, the port infrastructures to do them, and the fact that has to be a global infrastructure. It's no point just being able to do it in a few countries, because the ships are moving globally. That is a massive transition across a geographically diverse area. And one of the really challenging things is we haven't yet got a consensus on what those green fuels will be. So you can see it is a huge transition, which involves as much, if not more, about what happens on land than actually is what going on at sea, which is in some ways the more straightforward bit. So I think that's that's an example of going beyond business as usual.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's a really good example as well. And I think for me, as soon as you start thinking about these things, even within just one sector, it just snowballs into, yeah, you're right, this whole system change that's needed. And one thing that I'm really interested in is making sure that this transition is a just one. So that we're not leaving people behind and we're not suffering as happened in the 1980s in the UK with the end of coal mining, essentially, a lot of mass unemployment and kind of trying to bring people along with that. And I think it's interesting, I do a lot of work with offshore wind, and I've seen particularly, obviously, with the latest round 4 round going to a lot of oil and gas or traditionally oil and gas players who are coming into this market, which has been, which has emerged out of new players within a new sector of renewable energy. So I'm not really sure where I'm going with my question, but there's something there about a just transition, not just for society and people, but also within these industries. So that kind of trade-off between emerging and new industries. I mean, oil and gas has so much experience offshore. So, bringing that across into renewables, it's fantastic for decarbonizing and for net zero. But for the players that have kind of built that industry, there is kind of a bit of a, but we were here first, and maybe you could go and do something else. So yeah, just your thoughts on kind of ensuring that these transitions are just and equitable and fair. Who wants to tackle that one?
I'm happy to give a couple of thoughts on this. I think in general, maybe quite high level view is that for these transformations to happen at pace, and we all know that it's urgent, we need all hands on deck. So in a way, I understand your view on how things need to be equitable within the industries and fair. But to be frank, I'm sure we need all of these actors working together to achieve the goals that we need to achieve and the time we need to do that. So again, all hands on deck, I think, is what is required, in collaboration as well across stakeholders, not only within industry, but also industry, finance, NGOs, intergovernmental organizations, governments, policymakers, scientists. Everyone needs to be working on the same thing, really, and together, not just in silos. And on the bit about society and equitable change, transition, I think this is a topic that's really important to highlight within the blue economy. We hear a lot about the environmental issues, but I think especially within the ocean space, which is difficult in itself already to govern, it goes beyond borders. It touches on indigenous peoples' rights. Coastal communities are heavily involved, so really involving that social, or including that social aspect of the work, is really crucial, and it's something that I don't necessarily hear that much about out there when I speak to people, but I see some encouraging signs. For example, the government of Canada has just published its blue economy strategy, and it has a big focus on the social issues within the blue economy, including indigenous people's rights, and that is really encouraging.
Fabulous. Yes.
So I agree with everything that's been said there by Dennis. I maybe just pick up some slightly different points. Firstly, we know that climate change itself, its impacts are going to be disproportionate across the world, and that some of those least able to afford it are going to be the most impacted. And so there is, it's really important that is recognised in the transition, and of course that is one of the great challenges of the green transition, is to enable that economic development to happen where it needs to happen, without, if you like, repeating what we've been doing over the last 150 years of industrialization. So that is a is an important challenge. The other thing is, when I've talked about ocean knowledge, we often think we're talking about scientific knowledge, and I was, but not only scientific knowledge. There's been a lot of traditional knowledge and know-how, knowledge of indigenous communities. A lot of it is ingrained, knowledge handed down over generations in many sectors, and that is a really important part of the knowledge part of the ocean knowledge economy, and we should respect all of that, because it is all very, very valuable. But the other area I was going to comment on is, I've talked about people impacted by climate change, but the costs of the transition will also be unevenly distributed. And again, as very often happens, the highest cost impacts may fall on those, again, who are least able to afford it. And if we just look at our own country in the United Kingdom, some aspects of this energy transition are going to lead, in the short term at least, to higher energy costs, higher food prices, and those costs will fall on people who are maybe least able to afford it, and that is why this needs to be a just transition, not only because of the justice of it, but if it isn't, those people will find voices, and eventually, and they will find political voices, and that can drive this change into reverse. And so it is important that everyone is brought along, and no one is left behind in that transition. On an optimistic note, again, I'm looking to the United Kingdom. Some areas of the blue economy that are growing are actually bringing opportunities and jobs to some of the areas of the United Kingdom, particularly I'm thinking of the northeast of England and northwest of England, which really have the prospect to be the absolute engine of this new industrial, green industrial revolution, as they were in the original industrial revolution, and really bring huge opportunities. And so just transition in the UK it sometimes goes by another title, which is leveling up, but it's I think that's an important opportunity as well that we shouldn't forget.
Fabulous. Thanks for that, Ed. I don't think I could have said it better myself. That was, yeah, there is that tension, isn't there, between needing to make changes and knowing that in the short term, those changes might not be too comfortable. And we do have a question from the audience, which I'm going to read out, but also add a little bit to as well. So given that most of us have a rather terrestrial mindset, how can we build bridges between the general public's behavior and awareness and ocean impacts resulting from our behaviors? And what strikes me with this, and it was a question that I noted down in your talk, talking about kind of as we go further offshore to mine for rare minerals that we need for our smartphones and iPads and all of the rest of it. If we're looking to maintain that lifestyle, and indeed progress that lifestyle, how does that sit with awareness of ocean impacts, and can we bring those two together?
If I may, I'll say a couple of things about that question. I think there's a big topic here that would maybe address that question, which is improving ocean literacy across the board, across civil society and business and government. Ocean literacy is I think #1 priority here, to have people learn about the ocean, how it works, and how we're impacted by it and how we impact it. And the UN Ocean Decade that Ed mentioned earlier on is partly one of the mandates is to increase that as well, in addition to ocean research, of course. And I think that really is crucial. in order to raise the awareness within society of these issues. I also wanted to just touch on that point of mining. I think there is a big discussion happening right now within the field on whether that is needed for the green transition. A lot of science voices would say it's not. There is the possibility to make batteries with other metals that are not necessarily deep sea mined. There is the prospect of the circular economy that's being proposed by the EU Green Deal as well. So we'll receive a lot of push. And most importantly, we don't know much about the deep sea, and what we know says that such activities might have a massive and most likely irreversible impact on deep sea ecosystems that are very fragile and very slow to recover, if they recover at all. Yes, that's why there's a big push for a moratorium right now on deep sea mining, to essentially wait and not engage until we know more, alongside with the UN Ocean Decade for ocean science. That's it from my side. Ed, over to you if you have any other points on that.
Good. Just a couple of points. Firstly, I totally agree with everything you said about ocean literacy, and that is absolutely important. Probably the term ocean literacy is not a very good one. We probably ought to find a better one, because it's sort of slightly pejorative. It implies that people who are less familiar with the ocean are somehow illiterate, which is not a good place to start with engaging people. But nevertheless, the agenda of really trying to raise not only awareness but real engagement and understanding in both our impacts on the ocean and the ocean's impact on us in our everyday lives, which is remarkable and so unseen. And to get past the out of sight, out of mind attitudes to the ocean. Most of what goes on is unseen, and we can understand, what goes on in the deep sea and being invisible, but it goes beyond that. It goes seriously beyond that. During the COVID pandemic, we've had mariners, sailors stranded on ships for months and months on end in absolutely terrible welfare conditions, because they, for example, have not been treated as key workers and have not been able to either get off their ships and get home, and replacement crews have not been able to travel. And we've just had an absolutely horrific situation in terms of welfare. And it's also a contributor to some of the global supply chain problems we're experiencing. But people don't focus on that because it's out of sight, out of mind. So it's not just this deep water that we don't recognize what it's doing. It's a lot of people who work in the marine environment feel undervalued and under-recognized for what they do. And the slogan that no ships, no shopping is a connection that's even at that level people don't make. So I think it really is endemic that we don't understand how the ocean is integral to everything that goes on. On the point of deep sea mining, I think I agree that this is a contentious subject, and it is. There are schools of thought that these minerals are absolutely critical and that they are essential for minerals. The other is that yes, we can actually find either alternatives or other sources on land, and that we're being sold a false dichotomy. That it's the green economy. Renewables and so forth versus minerals, and you can't have one without the other, and that is an oversimplification. The real issue here is that we may not have the luxury of waiting and using all of the precautionary principles, because it is quite clear the impacts could be very, very significant, at least for some types of deep sea mining. Others are probably less damaging. The one that is the area of contention is particularly what are called manganese nodules on the abyssal plains, as they're probably the most destructive. But as some of you may know, that there has been a recent initiative which is essentially challenging the International Seabed Authority that they will essentially start to mine and use the regulations which are in force today, having given 2 years notice, and there is a clause within the relevant agreements which allows that to happen. So it's all of a sudden has upped the ante on this and put pressure into the system that maybe wasn't there. So we may find ourselves in some of this territory much more quickly than we had hoped, which is why I think it's important for us to consider it and get on top of the issue.
Yeah, I agree. We need to stop talking and start doing actions, kind of move from theory to action. Lots of thinking has happened. Now we really need to push that forward. And I guess with that in mind, and with COP26 literally just around the corner, I live near Glasgow and it's getting crazy. If you had just one wish of an outcome from COP26 regarding the oceans, what would it be? Just a simple question.
Well, not so simple to answer, probably. I remain hopefully optimistic of COP, but I think I would hope that the link between tackling the climate crisis and a healthy ocean is explicitly made, and that countries take it into account from here on forward. I think that's probably the main thing for my end.
So I would agree with that the ocean becomes very much mainstreamed into the whole agenda. Just relating to the knowledge base, though, there is one particular area that I would like to see some action in, and that is what the changes that are happening in the ocean and its carbon cycle and so forth. There is a lot of uncertainty around these things. Is the ocean continuing to take up CO2, or will it continue to take it up at the rate that it is doing now? And the ocean, any natural system, the ocean in particular, is capable of throwing up surprises and changes with very, very rapid tipping points, some of which could set things like net zero targets completely off track if we don't know. So there's a lot of baseline information that we just don't know. I would like to see progress, as is one of the priorities and challenges of the decade of ocean science, to move towards a globally sustainable ocean sensing system, which is providing us with the continual data that we need. And I make the analogy that if a sick patient turns up to a hospital emergency room, what's the first thing that they do? And the ocean is sort of sick patient is the analogy I'm making here. Well, the first thing that actually happens is they get hooked up to the monitoring the vital life signs, the blood pressure, the oxygen saturation, and all of these things, in order to start treating the patient. What is happening to the condition? What is the diagnosis here? Is this condition deteriorating? Is it getting worse? Is there anything complications setting in? And then, is this treatment working? Is it making a difference? And so it sort of goes hand in hand with this, and we haven't quite got the ocean hooked up, if you like, to the vital life signs system. And we're starting to launch in with treatments, some of which may or may not work. And I think it's important that we have that evidence base continually. It's not a question of we know we've got a problem, now we need to solve it. We need to be continually assessing how that is going on. Call it adaptive management, and it's all about having that information and continuous stream of information and data in the loop. And I would like to see some serious progress into actually doing that, and that commitments relating to the ocean also entail commitments to actually have that infrastructure in place, because it's not sufficient and it's not robustly funded. It's happening too much by chance. And so I think that's an important part of being serious about solutions, is to be serious about monitoring whether your solutions are working. So I'd like to see some progress in that.
Great. So I'm going to sum up in just a couple of minutes. But before I do, I wondered if both of you, today we've talked a lot about the challenges that we're facing, obviously with climate change and transition to a sustainable blue economy. So just to kind of leave our audience today and other IES members that might be watching this video later, or watching us on video later, if we could end with some kind of positive messages about the opportunities that we have it in front of us, because wherever there are challenges, there are obviously opportunities to overcome them, and how our members can get involved with that.
I would say reach out to financial institutions. Of course, that's very biased of me, but financial institutions are in need of scientific expertise on this topic. So reach out to them. If they reach out to you, engage, foster collaboration between science and business and finance. I think that's pretty crucial to have this cross-pollination, and that whatever financial institutions and businesses are actively doing in the ocean space is based on the best available science. I think that's crucial.
Yes, so we'll obviously support that. The only other thing I would add is that the ocean is full of solutions. There's a lot of opportunities there, and there are a lot of solutions if we're smart enough to use them and to operate in a sustainable way in the ocean. So we should grasp that opportunity and to treat the ocean in ways that are sustainable. We don't have to repeat all of the same mistakes that we've made on land in the ocean. So we still got time to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, and thanks to both of you for your contributions today. I've certainly learned a lot, and it's kind of re-engaged me with sustainable blue economy more so than usual. So I think just to sum up our discussion today, going back to Dennis's talk, the importance of engaging with the finance sector within blue economy is crucial. And for me, the thing that really kind of spoke to me was the need to speak the right language when talking to financial institutions or kind of the insurance industry. And I think there's a wider point there about whenever we're talking about these kind of global crises or global opportunities, ensuring that we're using the right language for the audience that we're talking to, whether that is within finance, within environmental science, or just kind of the general public, just tailoring that message to make sure that we get the impact that we need. And I think all of the members across the IES bring their own expertise and their own ways of seeing the challenges that we face, and can really help with the opportunities as well. We should be aiming for net zero or better. There is no business as usual anymore. We need to be better than that. And just to kind of reiterate the positive points that our panelists ended on, there are opportunities, there are solutions, and there are great opportunities within the IES membership to really get involved and help change the way that we do things for the better. And I think with that, I'm going to leave it there and hand back over to Ethne for some final comments about the session. But thanks again to our panelists today, and thanks for hosting.
Oh, thank you so much. That was such an informative and insightful conversation. And I really hope it's given all of our attendees a good grasp of the blue economy and the opportunities that exist within it. So a massive thank you to our speakers, Ed and Dennis. They were amazing presentations. And to our expert chairing from Catherine, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day for this. This is going to be it from us attendees. I hope you found it as beneficial and informative as I did. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a lovely weekend. Thank you. Bye.